The moment Clara Whitmore stepped into her father's crowded ranch house beside the most handsome young man in the territory, every conversation stopped. Only minutes earlier, she had been locked inside the outdoor kitchen. Now she stood beneath the warm glow of oil lamps wearing a faded brown dress with a torn cuff, an old flower-stained apron still tied around her waist, and one loose strand of dark hair falling across her cheek. Beside her stood 30-year-old Nathaniel Hayes. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, handsome enough that nearly every unmarried woman in Willow Creek had found some excuse to glance toward the door waiting for him. He was the only son of the wealthiest cattle rancher in 3 counties, and his hand rested gently beneath Clara's elbow as though escorting her into that room was the most natural thing in the world. Clara's stepmother, Margaret Whitmore, went pale. Her daughter, Lillian, who had spent most of the afternoon dressing especially for Nathaniel, stared at them as if someone had slapped her. But the person who looked most confused was Clara's father. Daniel Whitmore slowly lowered his glass. "Clara." Nathaniel looked around the room, then back at the young woman beside him. "I found your daughter locked inside the kitchen, Mr. Whitmore." Silence settled over the room, and for the first time in 17 years, Clara realized that perhaps the truth could finally find its way through a locked door. If you have ever loved stories about women who were overlooked, underestimated, or treated as though they mattered less than everyone else, subscribe and stay with Clara's story. Because sometimes the person a family tries hardest to hide becomes the one nobody can ignore. 22 years earlier, Clara had entered the world on a freezing January morning while snow covered the Whitmore ranch from fence post to fence post. Her mother, Elizabeth, never recovered from the birth. She held Clara only twice. 3 days later, she was gone. Daniel Whitmore buried his wife beneath the old cottonwood tree on the hill overlooking the ranch. For almost 4 years afterward, Daniel tried raising Clara alone. He was a good cattleman, a respected businessman, a man who could look across a pasture and tell how many cattle it could support through winter. But he knew almost nothing about raising a little girl. He burned meals, forgot ribbons for her hair, once took Clara to town wearing 2 different stockings because he had dressed her before sunrise. But he loved her. Whenever Daniel returned from working the herd, little Clara would run across the yard shouting, "Papa." And Daniel Whitmore, no matter how tired he was, always lifted her into his arms. By the time Clara turned 5, however, the Whitmore ranch had grown too large for Daniel to manage alone. He was traveling farther west buying cattle, negotiating grazing rights, selling horses, and arranging shipments. That was when Margaret Avery entered their lives. Margaret was a widow with a 3-year-old daughter named Lillian. She was practical, organized, and capable. She understood accounts. She understood ranch supplies. And more importantly to Daniel, she seemed affectionate toward Clara, at least when he was watching. Within a year, Daniel married her. For a while, Clara believed she had finally been given another mother. Margaret brushed her hair, taught her to sew, helped her prepare for church. But after Daniel began traveling more frequently, something changed. The affection disappeared. Not suddenly. Slowly. Quietly. In ways a child could hardly explain. When Daniel was home, Clara ate roast beef, potatoes, vegetables, and warm bread at the dining table. When Daniel left, Margaret often sent her to eat in the kitchen. Sometimes there was only leftover stew. Sometimes biscuits from breakfast. And sometimes Margaret simply told her she had already eaten enough. Lillian received new dresses. Clara received Lillian's old ones after they became too short. Lillian had ribbons from town. Clara was told ribbons were foolish. Lillian learned piano from a woman who visited every Thursday. Clara cleaned the room afterward. By the time Clara was 10, she had learned an important lesson. There were 2 Whitmore households. The one her father saw, and the one that existed after his horse disappeared down the road. Daniel would return from a trip carrying presents. A small silver hair comb for Clara. A new doll. Perhaps a book. Margaret always smiled. How thoughtful. Then several weeks later, Clara's belongings would disappear. When she asked about them, Margaret would say, "You misplaced them." Eventually, Clara stopped asking. She did not tell her father. Children often believe adults will automatically understand things adults have never seen. And Margaret had another weapon. Fear. Whenever Clara threatened to tell Daniel, Margaret leaned close and whispered, "Your father already carries the burden of this ranch. Do you truly wish to burden him with childish complaints too?" Clara would shake her head. Good girl. Then Margaret would smile. As Clara grew older, the differences between the girls became impossible to ignore. Lillian was pretty in an obvious way. Golden hair, blue eyes, a lively laugh. She enjoyed attention and learned very early how to collect it. Clara was quieter. Her beauty arrived gradually. Dark brown hair grew thick down her back. Her gray-green eyes resembled her mother's. She became slender but strong from years of helping around the ranch. And unlike Lillian, Clara could ride almost any horse Daniel owned. She understood cattle. She could repair a broken harness. She knew which workers had families, which had debts, which sent money home, and which horse would refuse a saddle if approached too quickly. The ranch hands respected her. Margaret noticed, and she disliked it. When Clara turned 18, Daniel began taking her advice about certain ranch matters. Nothing important at first. A horse purchase, feed supplies, which pasture needed repairs. But each time Daniel listened to Clara, Margaret's expression tightened. She had spent 13 years assuming Lillian would eventually become the daughter everyone admired. Now people were beginning to notice Clara. Daniel noticed too. "You've got your mother's head for people," he told Clara one evening. Clara smiled. What does that mean? She knew who to trust. Margaret had overheard the conversation from the hallway. After Daniel left for Denver the following morning, Clara found herself assigned almost every unpleasant task on the property. Her stepmother never beat her. Margaret was too clever for that. Bruises could be seen. Instead, she exhausted Clara. Laundry, cleaning, kitchen work, inventory, mending, preparing rooms. Then Margaret would invite visitors and apologize for Clara's absence. She isn't feeling social today. Years passed this way. By the summer Clara turned 22. Daniel announced he would host the largest gathering the Whitmore Ranch had seen in years. It was not a ballroom. There were no chandeliers, no polished marble floors. It was an ordinary frontier celebration following the end of a successful cattle season. Long wooden tables would be set inside the main house and beneath the covered porch. Lanterns would hang from posts. Fiddlers from town would play reels. There would be roasted beef, beans, fresh bread, pies, coffee, and whiskey. Ranchers from across the territory would attend with their families. Daniel had another reason for holding the celebration. He wanted to strengthen relationships with men he had done business with for decades. One name caught Margaret's attention immediately. Hayes. Samuel Hayes owned more cattle than anyone within 100 miles. His property stretched so far that men joked a rider needed breakfast and supper just to cross it. But Samuel's wealth was not what made Margaret interested. It was his son, Nathaniel Hayes, 30 years old, unmarried, successful in his own right. Nathaniel had taken over several sections of the Hayes business and had recently returned from overseeing cattle shipments farther east. Women whispered about him at church. Mothers mentioned his name casually around unmarried daughters. Even Lillian had heard enough stories to become interested without ever meeting him. When Margaret learned Nathaniel would attend Daniel's gathering, she began planning immediately. A dressmaker was brought from town. Lillian chose pale blue fabric that made her eyes seem brighter. New gloves were purchased. Her hair was styled twice before Margaret approved it. For 2 weeks, almost every conversation between them concerned Nathaniel Hayes. "Do not appear too eager," Margaret warned. "I won't. Men like him are accustomed to women chasing them." "I said I won't. And do not talk too much." Lillian frowned. "You always say men like women who can converse. Conversing is not the same as never becoming quiet." Clara heard these discussions while polishing serving dishes. Margaret purchased nothing for her. Daniel noticed 2 days before the gathering. "Clara, where's your dress?" Clara looked toward Margaret. Margaret answered before she could. "She told me she prefers the green one she already owns." Daniel looked surprised. "The old green dress." Clara hesitated. Margaret's eyes settled on her. "Yes, Papa." Daniel studied her for a second. "If you're certain." "I am." He kissed her forehead and returned to organizing the ranch hands. Margaret smiled once he had gone. "You see how simple life becomes when you don't create trouble?" Clara said nothing. The morning of the gathering, the Whitmore Ranch came alive before sunrise. Men moved benches. Women prepared food. 2 boys hung lanterns from the porch. A fiddler arrived from town carrying his instrument beneath one arm. Clara worked from breakfast onward. She arranged platters, carried linens, helped prepare bread, checked the coffee. Meanwhile, Margaret and Lillian spent most of the afternoon upstairs. As evening approached, wagons began arriving. Guests stepped down wearing their best clothes. Men wore dark coats, waistcoats, boots polished for the occasion. Women wore modest frontier dresses, shawls, ribbons, and bonnets. Children ran near the porch until their mothers called them back. The ranch house filled with conversation. Clara went upstairs to change. Her green dress lay across her bed. It was old, but still decent. She had carefully repaired the hem. Before she could put it on, Margaret entered. "You won't be wearing that." Clara turned. "What?" "I need you in the kitchen. There are already 4 women helping. They'll need another. Papa said I should attend." Margaret closed the door. "Your father is occupied." Clara stared at her. "I'm his daughter, and tonight is important to him. Then why shouldn't I be there?" Margaret stepped closer. "Because for once, Clara, I refuse to let you spoil something for Lillian." Clara almost laughed. "How would my attending a gathering spoil anything?" "You know exactly how." For the first time, Clara understood. "Nathaniel Hayes." She shook her head. "I have never even met him." "That doesn't matter." Margaret picked up the green dress. "Lillian has spent weeks preparing for tonight. So you will remain useful." She carried the dress away. Clara followed. "Give it back." Margaret turned sharply. "You have spent years being handed advantages simply because Daniel Whitmore is your father. Lillian deserves something of her own." Clara could barely believe what she was hearing. "I was never handed anything." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "You were handed this ranch the day you were born." Then she walked out. Half an hour later, Clara found herself in the detached kitchen wearing the same faded brown work dress she had worn all day. Food moved constantly between the kitchen and the house. As darkness settled, laughter carried across the yard. Music began. Clara could hear boots striking the wooden floor as people danced. She kept working. Then one of the kitchen women told her they needed more jars from the storage shed. Clara stepped outside. When she returned several minutes later, Margaret was waiting. "You can remain here now." Clara frowned. "What do you mean?" Margaret walked out. Before Clara reached the door, she heard the lock slide into place from the outside. For several seconds, she simply stood there. Then she grabbed the handle. "Margaret!" No answer. Clara pulled harder. "Margaret!" Footsteps moved away. Clara felt something inside her break. Not because she was missing a party. Not because Lillian had a fine dress while hers had been taken. But because she suddenly understood that Margaret was no longer merely being cruel. She was erasing her. Clara struck the door. "Open this." The music from the house was too loud. She hit it again. No one heard. Or so she believed. Nathaniel Hayes had spent most of that day nearly 40 miles away settling a disagreement involving a cattle delivery. By the time he reached the Whitmore property, the gathering had been underway for almost an hour. He was tired, dusty, and irritated that his father had insisted he attend. Samuel Hayes had already arrived earlier. Nathaniel planned to enter quietly, greet Daniel, stay an hour, then leave. But the Whitmore ranch yard was crowded with horses and wagons. A ranch hand directed him toward the wrong side of the house. Nathaniel dismounted near the detached kitchen. That was when he heard the pounding. He stopped. Another bang came from inside. Then a woman's voice. "Is anyone there?" Nathaniel walked toward the door. "Hello." Silence. Then quickly, "Yes." He examined the latch. A heavy wooden bar had been placed across it. Nathaniel frowned. "Stand back." He lifted the bar and opened the door. Clara stood several feet away. Her cheeks were flushed. A streak of flour marked one sleeve. Her hair had partly loosened from its pins. Nathaniel stared at her. Not because she looked pitiful, because even wearing a ragged work dress in a dim kitchen, she was striking. Clara stared back. Nathaniel Hayes looked nothing like she had imagined. He was taller than most men she knew, broad across the shoulders, dark hair slightly disordered from riding, a strong jaw shadowed by the beginning of evening stubble. His face was handsome in a way that would have been almost intimidating if his eyes had not looked so calm. He glanced at the lock. "Were you put in here?" Clara swallowed. "Yes." "By whom?" She hesitated. "That is a longer story." Nathaniel looked toward the house, where the music continued. "Are you one of the kitchen workers?" Clara almost smiled. "No." "Then who are you?" "Clara Whitmore." Nathaniel's expression changed. "Daniel Whitmore's daughter?" "Yes." He looked at the locked kitchen again, then at her. Nathaniel was not a man who enjoyed other people's family affairs, but he understood humiliation. And whatever had happened here, someone had intentionally prevented Daniel Whitmore's daughter from entering her own father's gathering. "Come with me." Clara's eyes widened. Where? To the house. She looked down at herself. I'm dressed like this. Nathaniel glanced at her faded dress. So? Clara nearly laughed. You're clearly not a woman. I've been reliably informed of that. Despite herself, she smiled. Nathaniel offered his arm. Miss Whitmore. She stared at it. You cannot be serious. I rode nearly 40 miles to attend this gathering. I would hate to enter alone. Clara looked toward the house, then took his arm. They crossed the yard together. And when Nathaniel Hayes entered the Whitmore home beside the daughter everyone had been told was too busy to attend, the entire evening changed. Daniel demanded an explanation. Margaret immediately stepped forward. There has obviously been a misunderstanding. Clara looked at her. A misunderstanding? Margaret forced a laugh. The kitchen door sticks sometimes. Nathaniel spoke before Clara could. It did not stick. Margaret's smile disappeared. It was barred from the outside. Several guests exchanged looks. Daniel turned toward Margaret. You barred Clara inside? Of course not. Then who did? I cannot possibly know. Lillian rushed forward. Mother has been here with me. That was not true, but Daniel did not know it. Clara could have exposed everything. 17 years of it. Instead, she looked around at the faces watching her and felt ashamed. Not of what Margaret had done, of being discussed. I don't know who locked it, she said quietly. Nathaniel looked at her. He knew she was protecting someone, but he did not challenge her. Daniel removed his coat and placed it around Clara's shoulders. You should change. Margaret spoke quickly. Yes, that would be best. Nathaniel shook his head. I hope Miss Whitmore will stay. Lillian's face tightened. Clara looked at him. Like this. He smiled. Especially like this. You've already made the most memorable entrance. A few guests laughed kindly. The tension eased. Clara stayed. For the next hour, something happened Margaret had not anticipated. Nathaniel did not leave Clara's side. Not completely. He spoke with his father. He greeted Daniel's business partners. He danced once with an older rancher's wife whose husband insisted. But he always seemed to find his way back to Clara. They sat for nearly 20 minutes on the porch speaking about horses. Nathaniel discovered Clara understood breeding bloodlines better than several men he did business with. You know your father's ranch? Better than he realizes. Does he know that? I don't think anyone knows much about what I know. Nathaniel studied her. Why? Clara glanced toward the house. Some people are more comfortable when you remain what they have decided you are. Nathaniel understood there was more behind those words. He did not press. Before leaving that night, he asked Daniel if he might visit again. Daniel looked at Clara, then smiled. I imagine that depends more on her than me. From the doorway, Margaret heard every word. 3 days later, Nathaniel returned. Margaret told Clara he had come to discuss cattle with Daniel. That was partly true. Nathaniel spent 20 minutes with Daniel, then asked where Clara was. Margaret answered, resting. Clara was actually repairing fencing on the western pasture. Nathaniel found her there accidentally. The next week, he visited again. This time Margaret sent Clara into town. Nathaniel waited until she returned. Soon their meetings became impossible to prevent. They rode together, walked beside the creek, talked on the porch while Daniel conducted business nearby. Nathaniel never behaved like the romantic heroes in the books Lillian secretly read. He did not make dramatic speeches. He listened. That mattered more. Clara had spent most of her life feeling that speaking too loudly caused trouble. Nathaniel made her feel that what she said deserved space. He learned about her mother. She learned about his. He admitted that people assumed being Samuel Hayes' son had made his life easy. It has made some things easy, Nathaniel said. And others. Everyone wonders whether anything I accomplish belongs to me or to my father's name. Clara understood that feeling better than he expected. Margaret watched their friendship deepen with growing alarm. Lillian noticed too. One afternoon, Lillian confronted Clara near the barn. You did this deliberately. Clara turned. Did what? You knew Mother wanted Nathaniel to notice me. I did not even know him. You walked into that party on his arm. Because your mother locked me in a kitchen. Lillian looked away. That told Clara something. You knew? Lillian did not answer. You knew she locked me in there? I knew she wanted you away from the gathering. Clara stared at the girl she had grown up beside. You could have opened the door. Lillian's jaw tightened. You always get everything. Clara almost could not speak. What exactly have I gotten? This ranch. It belongs to Papa. And someday it will belong to you. Clara finally understood where much of Lillian's resentment came from. Margaret had fed it. Year after year. She had convinced her daughter that Clara's very existence was an injustice. "You are my sister," Clara said softly. "I never wanted to take anything from you. You're not my sister." The words hurt more than Clara expected. Lillian walked away. Nathaniel continued visiting. By autumn, Willow Creek had begun talking. Margaret changed tactics. If she could not keep them physically apart, she would make Nathaniel doubt Clara. She began carefully. At dinner one evening, she mentioned that Clara had always been restless. Another time she suggested Clara disliked ranch life and dreamed of leaving. Nathaniel did not react. So Margaret became bolder. When Nathaniel visited during Daniel's absence, Margaret invited him inside for coffee. Clara went writing. "I can wait." Margaret folded her hands. "You are serious about her." Nathaniel looked at her. "I care for her. I hope you understand Clara has always been somewhat difficult." "How?" Margaret sighed as though reluctant to speak. "She resents authority." Nathaniel almost smiled. "I have noticed she thinks for herself." Margaret realized the conversation was not working. "She also has expectations." "What expectations?" "Financial ones." Nathaniel's expression changed. Margaret continued carefully. "She knows who your father is." There it was. The accusation. Clara wanted Nathaniel for money. Margaret expected doubt. Instead, Nathaniel leaned back. "Mrs. Whitmore, the first time I met Clara, she was wearing an old work dress and locked inside a kitchen while your daughter was dressed to impress me." Margaret went still. If Clara were determined to pursue my family's money, she chose a very unusual strategy. Nathaniel stood. "Where did you say she went riding?" Margaret's face hardened. That evening she realized Nathaniel Hayes would not be easily manipulated. So she created a better lie. Several weeks later, a letter arrived at the Hayes ranch. There was no signature. It claimed Clara had secretly promised herself to a young ranch worker named Thomas Miller. It said she intended to marry Nathaniel only because Daniel's ranch was facing financial trouble and needed access to Hayes' money. Nathaniel read the letter twice, then rode directly to the Whitmore ranch. He found Clara near the creek. Without accusing her, he handed her the paper. She read it. Her face lost color. "Do you believe this?" "I came here because I wanted to hear you." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "Thomas Miller is married." Nathaniel blinked. "He has been married for 6 years." Nathaniel looked back at the letter. Clara continued. "He has 3 children." A laugh escaped Nathaniel before he could stop it. Clara stared at him. "This isn't amusing." "No, it isn't." But now he knew the letter had been written by someone who assumed he knew almost nothing about Whitmore Ranch employees. Clara's eyes filled with anger. "Someone wants you to think badly of me." "I know." "You know?" Nathaniel folded the letter. "Clara, whoever wrote this expected me to distrust you more easily than I do." Those words settled somewhere deep inside her. All her life, Margaret had taught Clara that affection could disappear the moment another person told a convincing enough lie. Nathaniel was showing her something different. Trust could ask questions before passing judgment. If stories about being judged unfairly, yet finally finding someone willing to hear the truth, speak to you, subscribe to the channel. Clara's story is not finished yet, and what Margaret did next nearly separated them for good. Winter arrived early. Daniel traveled to Missouri for a livestock agreement expected to keep him away nearly 6 weeks. Nathaniel was also gone, overseeing business on the southern range. Margaret saw her opportunity. One morning, she entered Clara's room carrying a letter. It came yesterday. Clara recognized Nathaniel's handwriting. She opened it immediately. The letter was short. Nathaniel explained that he had reconsidered their relationship. Their differences were greater than he had first understood. He wished her well. Clara read it twice. Then a third time. The words felt wrong. Cold. Distant. But the handwriting looked like his. Margaret remained near the doorway. "I'm sorry." Clara did not answer. "I warned you, men like Nathaniel Hayes have choices. Leave." Margaret almost smiled. For 3 weeks Clara heard nothing from Nathaniel. What she did not know was that Nathaniel had written 4 letters. Margaret intercepted every one. The letter Clara had received was a forgery created by a traveling clerk Margaret paid in town. Nathaniel eventually became worried. Clara had never ignored him before. When weather allowed, he returned unexpectedly. Margaret saw him riding toward the house and panicked. Clara was in the barn. Margaret met Nathaniel on the porch. "She doesn't wish to see you." Nathaniel stopped. "What?" "She received your letter." "What letter?" Margaret realized her mistake immediately. Nathaniel's expression sharpened. What letter, Mrs. Whitmore? At that exact moment, Clara stepped from the barn and saw him. For several seconds, neither moved. Then Clara crossed the yard. Why are you here? To see you. After what you wrote? I wrote you 4 times. Clara stopped. Margaret turned toward the door. Nathaniel caught the movement. Clara. She looked at him. I never ended anything. Clara's breathing changed. She ran upstairs and returned holding the forged letter. Nathaniel read it. That isn't mine. The handwriting looks similar. It isn't mine. Margaret had disappeared. Nathaniel looked toward the house. Where did you get this? Margaret gave it to me. Everything became clear. Clara began to tremble. Not with sadness. With fury. She marched into the house. Margaret stood near the dining room window. Clara held up the letter. You wrote this. Margaret remained calm. Lower your voice. You wrote it. I did what was necessary. Nathaniel entered behind Clara. Margaret looked at him. You don't understand. I understand enough. No, you don't. You come riding here, and suddenly Clara thinks she's better than this family. Clara stared at her. I never thought that. You never needed to. Daniel always preferred you. He is my father. And what is Lillian supposed to have? Clara's voice softened. His love. A home. A family. The same things I wanted. Margaret's face twisted. You were born owning everything she has spent her life hoping someone might give her. Nathaniel finally understood. This had never truly been about him. It was about the ranch. Inheritance. Resentment. A rivalry Margaret had created between 2 girls who might otherwise have become sisters. Clara said the words she should have spoken years earlier. When Papa returns, I'm telling him everything. Margaret went pale. You wouldn't. I should have done it when I was 10. Daniel returned 12 days later. Clara told him the truth. All of it. The meals. The missing belongings. The work. The lies. The kitchen. The letters. Daniel listened without interrupting. By the end, the powerful rancher who could negotiate with hardened cattlemen had tears in his eyes. I was here, he whispered, and I didn't see it. You weren't here, Papa. That was the truth that hurt him most. Daniel had believed providing money was the same as providing protection. He had built Clara a beautiful home and left her lonely inside it. Margaret denied some accusations, admitted others. Daniel did not shout. He simply told her their marriage could not continue as before. Margaret and Lillian moved into a smaller house Daniel owned near town while arrangements were made. Daniel continued supporting Lillian. Clara insisted on it. She didn't create all of this, Clara told him. Margaret did. Lillian did not speak to Clara for months. Then one spring afternoon, she arrived alone. Clara found her standing beside the old cottonwood tree where Elizabeth Whitmore had been buried. Lillian looked different. Not physically. Quieter. I was cruel to you. Clara said nothing. Lillian swallowed. Mother taught me that anything you received was something taken from me. Clara looked toward the ranch below. I believed her for a long time. I know. Lillian wiped her eyes. Nathaniel never would have chosen me. Clara almost smiled. This was never about him choosing one of us. I know that now. It was not complete forgiveness. But it was a beginning. Nathaniel proposed to Clara 2 weeks later. He did not do it at a grand dinner. There was no audience. They were beside the creek where they had held some of their longest conversations. Nathaniel held out a simple ring. I could make a speech. Clara smiled. You probably shouldn't. I thought you might say that. He took her hand. So I'll only ask one thing. Would you build a life with me? Clara looked at the man who had first seen her behind a locked kitchen door. Not dressed beautifully. Not prepared. Not pretending. He had seen her during one of the most humiliating moments of her life and had never once treated her as though she should be ashamed of it. Yes. Their wedding took place that autumn. It was held at the Whitmore Ranch. Not because Daniel wanted to impress anyone. Because Clara did. Long tables were arranged beneath the trees. Lanterns hung from wooden posts. The same fiddler who had played at Daniel's gathering returned. Women from town brought pies. Ranch hands washed and wore their best shirts. Nathaniel stood beneath the old cottonwood tree wearing a black coat and looking so handsome that even Clara laughed when she saw half the women staring. You seem pleased with yourself, she whispered when she reached him. I was waiting for you to notice. I noticed the first night. You hid it well. You found me in a flower-covered dress. And I still noticed. Daniel gave Clara away. Before stepping aside, he held her hand longer than expected. I'm sorry it took me so long to see what was happening. Clara squeezed his fingers. You see me now. Daniel nodded. Yes. Margaret did not attend, but Lillian did. She stood near the back, wearing a simple blue dress. When Clara looked toward her, Lillian smiled. Small, tentative, real. Nathaniel and Clara built their home several miles from the Whitmore Ranch, on land overlooking a wide stretch of prairie. Clara did not become a woman who forgot where she came from simply because she married a wealthy man. She became involved in the Hayes Ranch. She managed accounts, worked with tenant families, helped establish a small school for ranch children who lived too far from town. And whenever someone praised Nathaniel for marrying wisely, he always answered the same way. I was merely fortunate enough to take the wrong road to a party. Years later, people in Willow Creek still told the story. They remembered the night Nathaniel Hayes arrived late. They remembered the faded dress. They remembered Daniel Whitmore's shocked expression. They remembered Margaret turning pale. But the detail Clara remembered most was quieter. A locked door opening. Because her life had taught her that some doors are closed by people who fear what might happen if the world sees you clearly. Margaret had tried to hide Clara because she believed Lillian could only shine if Clara remained unseen. But love did not arrive because Clara became prettier, richer, louder, or more impressive. Nathaniel noticed her before he knew anything she could give him. He simply found a woman behind a locked door and believed she deserved to walk through it. And perhaps that is why some of the strongest love stories do not begin when someone rescues us. They begin when someone finally sees what others worked so hard to overlook. If you stayed with Clara all the way from that locked kitchen to the life she eventually built, subscribe to the channel. These stories are for people who still believe kindness matters, dignity matters, and being overlooked today does not mean you will remain unseen forever.